being recorded.
And we're about to begin in 3, 2, 1.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Lageson, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China and follow us on X at CPD China. For today's webinar, select the Q&A from your navigation bar to make comments or ask questions, and open up the chat for important links that we will share. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president for the Institute for the American Future, vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China, and host for Securing America on Real America's Voice Network. Frank, let's get started in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome, everyone, to this edition of our weekly webinar series sponsored by the Committee on the Present Danger China. It is intended to illuminate various aspects of the war that the Chinese Communist Party has been waging against this country for decades. Unrestricted warfare at that, and who in our country is helping them do it. I want to set the stage for what will be a very, I think, inspiring story about Americans fighting back against the Chinese Communist Party's efforts to take down our country, non-violently, let me hasten to add, those efforts to fight back. But before we do, a little scene setting. On the 21st of February of this year, President Donald Trump issued, I believe, the first of his national security presidential memoranda. This one was unveiling the America First investment policy. We've done several programs on it so far, and we'll be touching on it, I think, probably at a couple of points in the course of today's program, because not only did it focus on the problems associated with the outbound flow of American investments into Chinese companies, all of which are owned or at the very least under the control of our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, some of which actually work directly for the People's Liberation Army as well. And the president in this memorandum very helpfully, I think, lays out restrictions that are intended to end this underwriting of our enemy. But at the beginning of the memorandum, he talks about another aspect of the problem: Chinese investments inside or into this country. And we're going to be specifically focusing on several examples of that phenomenon and how problematic it is in terms of trying, again, to protect our country against malign Chinese warfare and destruction. We will be focusing particularly on two companies that have much in common. They're both, of course, Chinese Communist Party controlled companies. They both are in the electric vehicle battery manufacturing business. They both have ties to slave labor, and they both are seeking to establish manufacturing factories inside our country, specifically in the state of Michigan. One is known as Goshen High Tech. The other is, it goes, I think, for most of the purposes, by its acronym, CATL. It stands for Contemporary Amperex Technology Limited, CATL. This twofold program, these two companies have one other thing in common, and that is that both of them have been made possible, this effort to build plants in Michigan, with enormous taxpayer subsidies by the state of Michigan, and in some cases, I think local governments as well, if not outright financial subsidies, then concessions of various kinds. We're going to talk about what a problem such entities represent, not least because they are outposts of our mortal enemy and will have the capacity, if brought to fruition, to serve in potentially very ominous ways, including the Goshen plant, which is located not far, or the site of it is located not far from an important training facility in northern Michigan of the United States Army, I believe, National Guard. We're going to also talk about the implications of having the Chinese enterprises like these inside our energy sector. And I want to just read, to sort of, again, set the stage, a relevant section from the president's memorandum that makes clear not only that these are ill-advised kinds of investments inside America, but he seeks to end them. He said, quote, "The United States will use all necessary legal instruments, including the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, also known as CFIUS, to restrict PRC-affiliated persons from investing in United States technology, critical infrastructure, healthcare, agriculture, energy, raw materials, or other strategic sectors. My administration will protect United States farmland and real estate near sensitive facilities," unquote. So there you have it, folks. A pretty direct inhibition, shall we say, restriction on precisely what Goshen and CATL are trying to do. And we're going to turn first, for our discussion today, to someone who has, I think, as clear a perspective on what the Chinese are up to as anybody, and who has distinguished himself as one of the leaders of American grassroots entities across the country, including his own, which is entitled Stand Up Michigan. His name is Ron Armstrong. He is what's known as a frontliner, leader of such activist organizations, as well as a member of our Sovereignty Coalition and the Save America's Military Coalition. Extraordinarily important colleague and ally in the fight that we are engaged in against the Chinese Communist Party and for our freedom. Let me just add, Ron has been instrumental in helping our Committee on the Present Danger China establish a bit of a relationship with John Molinar, the chairman of the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Representative Molinar was invited to participate today and just couldn't do it due to scheduling conflicts, but we will catch up with him next week, I understand, and look forward to doing so. In his absence, we've asked Ron to address sort of the larger question of, as the congressman has put it, why we must stop funding our demise, point one, and what Americans, notably in Michigan, have been doing to stand up to the Chinese communists and their friends who are doing that kind of investing in or with the Chinese Communist Party. Ron, it's great to have you with us, sir. Thank you so much for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Frank. It's great to be with you. And I think there are 2 or 3 avenues that I'll run down quickly in this opening. And one is, first of all, never underestimate the power of the people. A representative republic is what we are. And what we have seen in America is not just the enemy that we have offshore, but the enemy that we have within. We have governors, specifically in the state of Michigan and in the state of Illinois, when we talk about Goshen High Tech, that have basically taken huge amounts of basically economic development, which is taxpayer dollars, other small business dollars, and have subsidized the Chinese Communist Party directly. They have typically done it, as they did in Mecosta County, Michigan, in a township called Green Township, Big Rapids Township. They're all there in this rural part of Michigan. Their zoning, which, by the way, don't ever underestimate the power of zoning, local zoning control, master planning. When you all hear those things, it seems like they're not important. They're very important, because this was designated to remain agricultural, not to become a commercial area. And basically, the governor put her thumb on a scale, bypassed most regulations, bypassed all of the issues that normally you would think mattered, like how it's going to affect our farmland, our water system, our watershed. All the things that mattered to them before seemed to not matter at all when it came to the Chinese Communist Party. And many of the people in the community were actually caught off guard by, what is this actually? What is this lithium battery plant going to do? What could it potentially contaminate in our farmland and our water system? Which, by the way, it's a main water system called the Muskegon River that runs directly through in its tributaries to the Lake Michigan. And if there was a problem, how would we protect ourselves? And we found there were no environmental controls that were done. And so the people began with a small group of people, including one you'll hear from here shortly, who lives in the township and really took a leadership role in this. It starts with getting people together with a common vision, common goal of, first of all, transparency through elected leadership. What was being planned there? What was being approved there? Was it done on behalf of the people or in spite of the people's wishes? And we recognized it was the latter, which meant they took action. They literally went, some of these had been in office for as much as 15 to 20 years, and they basically did a recalled the entire board ultimately. Won those elections by large numbers. They also had to rerun again in November, but it was in an effort to stop what was happening with this Goshen High Tech plant that was scheduled there, with gigantic $175 million subsidy to get started, tax abatements, which the community wouldn't see for up to 40 years. We're not going to pay any property taxes. All of this to subsidize the production and the reinforcement, really, of the Chinese Communist Party, who ultimately runs and controls Goshen High Tech. We were really a David and Goliath story. The people rose up to, literally, the numbers were around 70%. We know it probably more than that were against the project. Many of those that were for it were simply looking at jobs. What they had heard was opportunity. But the local media, the local people that were, again, serving on those boards, including some of the county commissioners, and guess what they did? They also didn't recall. They basically ran against, or ran a slate of people against them. And again, you'll hear more about that. But it does take, first of all, a group of people coming together with that common vision goal. It also involves messaging. You have to create the right messaging with the right messages that the people are going to receive and are going to react to. That was very important to this group. We had some great people on the ground that worked on that. It isn't just being against something, it's being for something. They created a sense of community around the branding called Choose Freedom. They were choosing freedom for their community and from tyranny and from the government basically taking over their property, their land rights, and whatever. They also are very supportive of the automotive industry. that exists in Michigan. As you know, the big three are all here. And yet what we have turned them into, or what our governor was trying to turn them into, is forcing them to mandate electric vehicles by 2030 to 2050. And through that process, they were forcing these companies to change. Every vehicle was being produced at a loss. And basically, they're dependent on the Chinese Communist Party for raw materials, for the batteries themselves, and for federal and state subsidies to have anyone be able to afford them, all while not supporting the infrastructure necessary to carry these out. Thank goodness we started all of this long before President Trump won election. And now what has happened is, through this memorandum, through his intentions of no mandates, and basically turning the power back. Many of you probably saw his latest press conference, which specifically under the tariffs was giving the power back to the people and the workers at these automotive companies. They are thankful for what it is that's happening, leveling the playing field. And I know the people of Michigan are very proud of the workforce. This is not a Republican or Democratic issue. It is an American issue, Frank. And we're very happy to say that with all the pressure, with the changes in boards, with them taking over the Planning Commission role as a local community, they have literally put a halt to this. There are lawsuits they have pending. They're trying to sue the township, but the community is standing strong. And John Molinar, who is our congressman, is actually asking them to do and follow the will of the people and to pull the plug on this project for good.
Ron Armstrong, thank you very much. This is an important overview of how things have evolved in the state of Michigan. To get a more granular look at what was done and the extent to which it really represents a template for how other communities across our country facing similar kinds of onslaughts. And I don't know how else to describe it when both the Chinese Communist Party and its various front entities, in collaboration with our own government entities, presumably not at the federal level at this point, but certainly in blue states like Michigan, we're going to hopefully learn lessons that might be applicable, a template, if you will, for resisting this kind of operation inside our wire. And for that purpose, I'm delighted that with Ron's help, we were able to arrange for a visit again with Ormond Hook. He is a veteran. He is a retired school psychologist, but he has really become a very formidable community organizer in the best sense of the word, not as Barack Obama would have had it. Based, I believe, in Big Rapids, Michigan, sort of the major city, as I recall, in Green Township. Ormond, thank you very much. We're so grateful to you for joining us really at the last possible moment to talk a bit about taking on Goshen and company, that is to say, its various friends, lessons for resisting the CCP and holding our government accountable. Welcome, sir. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much. This is an honor. And yes, our Pearl Harbor Day was September 26, 2022. And we've been at this for over 30 months. It was long. It was scary. It took energy. It took passion. It took persistence. And we had those qualities. It took leadership and a leadership team. It took us evaluating who all of our volunteers were and kind of directly or indirectly assigning our community members to their own skill areas to push back. We started out pretty much scared out of our wits, knowing we were up against everybody. We were, like you said, up against China, up against our governor, up against our county, up against the township. We had nowhere to turn to but ourselves. One very good and helpful part of this was about 2 years ago, in early 2023, John Molinar, our congressman, put out a letter to the editor in the Detroit News. We're here on the west side of the state, an hour north of Grand Rapids, but Detroit News, Detroit Free Press, they are our statewide publications. And he put a letter to the editor there, basically acknowledging for us that Goshen was a Chinese-connected affiliate. We'd been telling everybody locally, but no outside authority came and gave the stamp of approval on that statement. We went right to the Goshen website, got their articles of incorporation. Right in the first paragraph, it says they have to follow the laws of the country of China and the laws and rules of the Chinese Communist Party. And that was one of the first big helps that we had. We have had many people from around the country call us and ask how we carried out this fight. A few of the people that pushed back followed our pattern, and they've been successful. One of them is the No Goshen people in Manteno, Illinois. Manteno is in a way up against a bigger enemy than we were, just because of the ingrained control of government in Illinois is a little bit different than Michigan. So we were up against everybody. And we, like Ron said, we had a message. We had an organization. We met weekly. It's a good thing that I was retired at this time to put in all the time we had. We had so many people here, our volunteers that just worked. We would start at 4 or 5 in the morning and communicate all day long. We set up a big rally and a protest. And one of the key things that we did that some other folks haven't done, but the successful stories I know is when the local folks decide that we are going to replace the people in power. There's probably no better tactic or goal than to do that. And like Ron said, we took over the township, we took over the county. My township, which is right next door to Green Township, we recalled our supervisor and replaced him with a loyalist. And then we did all of this all over again this past November. We took control of all of our boards. But again, it was people desperate, working hard. One example, contrary to what we did someplace in another part of our state, they threw some old people out, but when they did not run a slate of candidates. They just let anybody apply and anybody ran, and then they got some of the old bad influences back on the board. So you do have to do this intelligently. Ask around. People contact us. People know how to contact us. But it's really effort. I would like to go back to another point that really made our fight so successful is a year ago this month, Green Township, after they had their new board in, they established their own planning and zoning. And we were right up against a deadline. We had about 3 days left. Green Township finally instituted their own planning and zoning commissions. And then that forced Goshen to come to Green Township, the new people, and apply to build. Up until that point, they had the green light from our county. And I don't think the county was going to put any restrictions on them at all. But when they had to come to the Green Township Board and the Planning Commission, that stopped them. Really, since a year ago, Goshen has been quiet here. They've done nothing except public relations. They leased a building that they were going to set up as an office, but it just sat empty. About every 2 weeks, they would put some type of public relations statement in the newspaper. The newspaper was on Goshen's side, and it made it look like to the outside world that they were pressing forward, when in actuality they weren't. Just this last December, the project manager for Goshen sent an email out to the Big Rapids mayor. Big Rapids is a small city here of about 9,500 folks. Green Township is like 3,000 residents, so we're really small. But they said they're firing all their employees. They fired or terminated the contract with their public relations firm. They put everything on hold. And the surprising thing is that Goshen never applied for a building permit to build, but they made it look like to the rest of the world that everything was going fine. And they said in their latest public relations statement that they put their environmental permitting on hold. Well, they never actually have applied for the permit. They were just scaring people into believing that they were here, even though they did bulldozer work and tree cutting and all of that. We held them up at every step of the way. We did not know exactly how to attack. We researched every day, and we just pushed back and pushed back. I would like to take some questions from any of you folks. If you'll think of a question, just hold it, and I will give you an update on the lawsuit status. So about a year ago, Goshen used lawfare. Goshen sued the township, and that went to a federal district court in Michigan. And then out of that grew an appeal to the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati, Ohio. Oral arguments for that will be held this May 8th. And they're trying to prove that the old board did institute a contract with Goshen to have this development agreement so that they could pursue with their construction. However, in their arrogance, because no citizen had been watching the township board, they never brought back that document to the township board for the township board to vote to accept this contract that would begin the building process. And one of our civilians discovered this. The lawyers didn't find this out. The township people, nobody. It was one of our citizens that was just diligent, that pushed back, found this information, got this to the lawyers. And so we think if as long as the judges and the Sixth Circuit are reasonable and look at the facts, that there never was a vote held. They only were in office for 3 more months. They never held a vote, never accepted this development agreement. And so we're really in the driver's seat, and we just want to thank everybody that's helped us.
Oman, thank you. And we will have questions at the end of this round of presentations, but yours is particularly appreciated because when we talk about the modern Minutemen, you are among them, and we are so appreciative, both for what you've done to date, and admittedly, this is perhaps a stay of execution rather than a commutation of sentence, but you certainly have the high ground, it seems, and that is tremendously appreciated. We're going to turn next to a man who understands energy as well as anybody I've ever met, and in particular has a deep appreciation for what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing to undermine our energy security, with not a little help from a man we've described on these programs repeatedly as a controlled asset of the Chinese Communist Party. That would be Joe Biden. But the cumulative effect, both in places like Michigan, but also in his native state of Florida, especially, and elsewhere across the country, has been very deleterious. The Chinese penetration and profiteering from taxpayer subsidies, as well as the willingness of their friends in this country to buy their equipment to populate our grid. We'll hear about all of this from Dave Walsh. He previously was in senior positions at Westinghouse and president of Mitsubishi Power. These days he is with the Dakota Group, a consulting firm. You see him frequently on War Room and our show and others. He is our go-to guy on energy, and we deeply appreciate his contributions to this program. To discuss with us the topic that what President Trump said in that passage that I read you about inbound investment. We do not want the Chinese Communist Party inside our energy wire in particular. It's great to have you back, Dave. Thank you so much for finding some time. The floor is yours, sir.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks for having me. Just to characterize over the last 5 years, from 2020 to 2025, and this year's over. I mean, for new capacity building and power plants in the country, all the equipment, the contracting, the land has been acquired already for 2025 plant building. So nothing's really able to change much this year. And all those orders are placed by the administration. But after this year, we ought to see some changes as the windage of the last 4 years expires. But since 2020 now, we've had $400 billion spent in this country on power plant equipment, which is now 91% intermittent and part-time. Solar being 70% of that. Solar and battery storage has been 70% of the new capacity added to the electrification hardware for power generation in the last 5 years. And that amounts to something like 180 to 200 billion of Chinese content of the 400 billion spent. This year will be the same. About 80% of the content installed this year will be battery storage, 29%, and 51% solar thin film PV, all emanating from China. So you've got an enormous takeover that's occurred. Before 2020, very little of the U.S. power generation equipment supply came from China, maybe 2% of it. But since about 2000, the year beginning with COVID, the recession of COVID through the Biden administration, we've seen an uplift where they now own about half of the U.S. generation equipment supply market, all of a sudden. And that's all thin film PV, and it's all battery storage and inverters and a portion of the wind turbines as well. So this whole ethos of trying to push the country through incentives to part-time, intermittent, renewable resources largely emanating from China, very clearly the money trail goes right back to China. Why these incentives in the first place were created and why they were embellished in the Biden IRA to now close to 40%. You've got capital equipment or investment tax credit incentives, plus then use incentives or PTC and production tax credits that add up to over 41% of the cost of a solar farm. So the new tariffs, the raised tariffs against Chinese imports of this type to 60% as of a week or so ago, now really at least offset in the main the incentive advantage this stuff had. But we're going to need to go further, and I'm sure that's going to happen. But the core of this is the fake, if you will, or the false localization of this kind of equipment supply. For example, in Florida, about 7 years ago, one of the largest Chinese solar manufacturers, Ginkgo Solar, put a 225,000 square foot distribution center in Jacksonville, owned by the CCP indirectly through Ginkgo Solar, as basically an importing facility near the port of Jacksonville to go ahead and have their inverters and their thin film PV brought to this country, all made in China, and then assembled on frames. So the value added equation there, about 85% the thin film PV coming from China itself, and maybe 15% local manufacturing, in order to distribute these panels to Florida Power and Light, to TECO, to Duke Energy, broadly for use in Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, and Alabama, but mainly here in Florida, where the state's on a huge binge to basically, to the extent possible, solarize the power generation system, even in Florida. But the fact of that beachhead was used to kind of fake that, or feign that they have localized supply, where actually 85% of the content of what goes on there is simply importation of the thin film PV into Florida for use across the Southeast. Unfortunately, Dr. Navarro, through his work supporting foreign trade under President Trump now, is seized on looking at facilities that, in terms of what their content actually is, whether it's car making or, more importantly here now, energy manufacturing, such as these products, and bifurcating, if the Chinese content is actually 85% of what comes through one of these so-called factories, such as Jinko Solar, that ought to be dutiable also, the entire content of the imported goods, which in the case of this equipment is on the order of 85% Chinese content. So that's a tremendous accomplishment by the folks in Goshen, on the Goshen facility in Michigan. It looks like has been stopped. We've got similar things continuing to happen here across the Southeast. Chinese firms looking at manufacturing transformers here. There's a woeful short supply of U.S. transformer manufacturing capacity, which hopefully with the tariffs will be embellished now with new investment here. But we don't want that to be Chinese investment. It makes no sense. And we're seeing more and more states resisting that. I don't think this Jinko Solar factory would have gone ahead were things as they are today, with more vigilance on this through Frank, your own efforts particularly. But 7-8 years ago, this wasn't in such a radar screen. Folks get very phased into the job creation that can be created by these facilities. But these facilities are participating in basically an artificial economy. Because when I'm talking about 42% net incentives between PTC and ITC on solar, the same on battery storage, the same on the batteries for EVs, you're really building facilities for, one, an enemy of the country to own here on our lands, and B, with the goal and objective of destabilizing our energy supply, making auto transportation more costly, making the use of electricity way more costly, and making it way more scarce. Because I'll just add, over the last 5 years, with this addition of 91% of our electrical capacity being part-time intermittent solar, wind, and batteries, we've had only 0.5% growth in capacity to make electricity, where, counting this year, demand from 2020 will be up 7.5%. So we're really falling woefully short in reserve margins and in the need to produce electricity, largely owing to displacing permanent, long-term baseload coal, nuclear, and gas plants with solar, wind, and battery storage. We're actually vastly diminishing the supply of on-demand electricity in this country, which is another advantage to China, in addition to the couple of $100 billion in import value they've enjoyed from 2020 to now. So this is fighting these facilities for their participation in this false economy, this artificial economy with these incentives through, one, the tariffs, and two, actions such as we're taking in Michigan. Just necessary, totally necessary, the right thing for the country, because the job creation associated with this stuff really is a ruse for the damage done to the economy otherwise in the kind of high cost equipment that they're going to proffer to make electricity and transportation far, far, far more expensive for Americans. So this is really important watershed in Michigan.
My apologies. Thank you so much, Dave. An incredibly important context for what we're discussing kind of at the micro level here is what is happening very much at the macro level. And nobody understands better than you. Thank you for sharing your insights. We're going to turn lastly to an individual who has stepped into the breach. We were hopeful of having his boss, Joe Gebbia, at State Shield, but Joe was actually going to be en route on a plane at this hour. So we are very pleased to have with us the Director of Policy for State Shield. That would be Tom Rawlings. Tom is a little under the weather, so it makes all the more appreciated his participation in this program to talk with us about what State Shield has been doing to help in state after state after state, fighting primarily with state legislatures, I think, and to some extent with governors and other state officials to counter the efforts of the Chinese to engage in the kind of inbound investment, as President Trump calls it, in some sensitive real estate deals, purchasing farmland in proximity to military installations and the like. We've asked him to discuss both his own success and that of other like-minded groups that have been fighting and, in at least some cases, beating the Chinese Communist Party's penetration of America at the state level. Tom, thank you so much for being with us, and over to you, sir.
Well, thank you, Frank. Glad to be with y'all. I apologize Joe wasn't able to be here. As Frank knows, Joe, a few years ago, really became concerned about the issue of Chinese infiltration of all of our institutions, and founded State Shield with the idea of replicating on the state level what was already going on to some extent at the federal level. So, for example, Chairman Molnar's Chinese Communist Party Select Committee, that kind of work. And so what we have done is we've been working over the last 2 years, growing from one state in Georgia to now about 10 states around the country, and working on educating legislators and governors and attorneys general on how we can deal with the Chinese communist threat. I think it's been great because a lot of the stuff that y'all have said today is so true, especially now that the president is really trying to reshore manufacturing. It was one thing to be beholden to the Chinese and to their efforts to infiltrate us. I think we are now going to be finding ourselves in a situation where they're going to be wanting to move more production facilities, manufacturing facilities here to the United States. And I think that is something we need to be in some ways welcoming, but also very cautious about. So as we look at the Chinese companies coming here, one of the things we need to make sure is that they are not allowed to use those facilities in a way that undermines our government, that they can spy on what we're doing, that they can steal our intellectual property. And as we all know, we have seen this time and time again, Chinese money and other hostile foreign money often simply corrupts the institutions that we're trying to maintain here, that promote our Western values of freedom and independence. So State Shield has been really especially happy to work in the last couple of years. And again, in a number of states, we've worked on issues of making sure that state pension funds divest from China, dealing with the drone threat. Dave mentioned the issue of transformers. One of the early things that I learned in this process is that we could have been in a situation careful where the Chinese cut off our electrical grid because we don't have any transformers that are made here. We know that our ports, the cameras that operate at our ports, are often able to send data back to the Chinese government. And so we have to do everything we can to decouple from the Chinese Communist Party and the companies that it obviously controls. One of the things that we're really honed in on, obviously, is preventing especially Chinese controlled organizations, companies, from acquiring land interests in the United States. I would say that Arkansas was a big leader in this. They passed a bill in 2023 that prohibited Chinese companies from acquiring agricultural land and land near some critical infrastructure. I am very happy to see that Governor Sanders in Arkansas has instituted some bills this year. I think one of those bills is we have been very fortunate to support that will actually
enhance the ability of the state to claw back some of the properties that Chinese affiliated companies have acquired over the last few years. We also, of course, saw in Florida, Governor DeSantis instituted a bill on that. And I can tell you that at State Shield, we're working right now. We've, of course, worked in Georgia to pass Senate Bill 420 last year, which restricts Chinese acquisition of agricultural properties here in the state, as well as properties that are close to a military base. We were very happy to see that Louisiana and Mississippi have also implemented legislation like that. We are currently working in Iowa. There are a couple of bills there. Missouri, there are actually 4 or 5 bills that we're working that are going through that process. Oklahoma, I know Indiana has had legislation like that. But I think the one thing that I want to emphasize to y'all is really a note that Dave Walsh mentioned a moment ago, which is that no matter how vigilant we are, and no matter how eager especially our Republican legislators are to help us in restricting Chinese influence, as they all say, money talks. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. In Tennessee, we've been working on a bill there to really require some foreign agents to register if they're affiliated with a hostile foreign nation. One of the biggest pushbacks we had was from a senior legislator who has Cirrus Aircraft has a facility in his district. And Cirrus Aircraft produces like Cessnas, that kind of aircraft, small aircraft, but they are in fact designated as a Chinese military company. So they are highly connected with the PLC and the CCP. We also had even our own supporters this year in the legislature, and I think, quite frankly, to some extent, unbeknownst to them, they were convinced to modify the agricultural restriction bill we had last year, the bill that generally applied also to land within a certain distance of a military facility. They were persuaded to adopt a definition of military facility that excluded the National Guard facilities. And as a result, we have a much weakened bill, I believe, and that they did it on behalf of a Chinese company that manufactures allegedly soy sauce, also involved in lots of other things. And it was all kind of done undercover without people understanding what was going on. They wanted to put in their facility near a National Guard armored or base. And so I think the lesson from that is that not only do we have to be very active at the state level in educating legislators and in educating governors and pushing legislation to protect the state infrastructure from the Chinese Communist threat, but we also have to be very, very careful about the fact that economic development is so valuable to state leaders that sometimes they will forget that the company that is coming to your town to build a plant like Goshen or whatever it may be sounds great for job creation. But is that job creation, in fact, going to really help the Chinese Communist Party undermine the freedoms that we have enjoyed in this nation for over 200 years? I don't know. I put it in our chat. I'm not sure if y'all seen it, but our organization is state-shield.org. We'd be happy to talk to y'all more about these issues, and I really appreciate Frank for letting me come and talk to you. I've got a very numb back tooth right now, so I apologize if I sound like I'm a little lisping or something. But I'm suffering a terrible toothache, and I had to numb my tooth. But I'm glad to be here with y'all and answer any questions you may have.
Well, again, Tom, thank you for rising to the occasion again without any forenotice due to Joe's travels, and doing so well. You did not lisp or otherwise have any other speech impediments, so well done. And more to the point, what you said about, in particular, following the money is so, I think, appropriate as a kind of leitmotif for everything that we've been talking about here so far. We're going to go to questions in just a moment, but I thought I might just drill down for a second on something I touched on at the beginning. Another example of this inbound investment with obvious national security implications is something that, again, Congressman Pat Harrigan has brought to our attention. He's introduced legislation to try to correct the situation. But as of now, a company that I grew up with in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, GNC, as it's known, I think General Nutrition Company or something like that was the provenance of the acronym. But it was essentially an American entity that unfortunately, despite some success, ultimately went bankrupt and apparently was bought out of bankruptcy by a company that took it over, rendered it as a wholly owned subsidiary named Harbin Pharmaceutical, I think out of Harbin, China. It is an entity that has successfully secured the presence of franchise, I guess, operations, or at least outlets of the company in 80 military bases across the United States. And as Congressman Harrigan has pointed out in a very powerful video that he's done on the subject, the opportunities for disastrous repercussions are very real. Evidently, a little while ago, one of the products that the chain sold on military bases, I can't remember what they call them, milkshakes or fraps or something, had to be recalled because, among other things in the mix, were hemp seeds, apparently, and they could give rise to drug test problems for military personnel. But what if it were poison that were in those fraps, or something that would otherwise disable those personnel and their families and so on? Obviously, it could be quite catastrophic. And this brings up a point that our friend and very, very revered colleague, Rosemary Gibson, has made repeatedly, notably with her terrific book, China RX, but also on a program of this series that we did a few months ago. We remain dependent upon these sorts of Chinese supply chains for virtually all of our generic medications, as well as ingredients that go into those that are still under patent. We're inviting disaster, I would submit, by so doing. But if that were not bad enough, the Chinese are also, as the congressman points out, able to use their interactions with and personal information generated in the course of those, not just interactions, but transactions, to garner a wealth of personal data about the people working on those bases, or likely, in some cases at least, deploying from them. The kind of data aggregation that the Chinese have specialized in now for many years, civilian data as well as that of military personnel. But a very real-time, very focused, and presumably quite useful trove of data about those who are currently serving in uniform, perhaps in some very sensitive roles indeed. So I just wanted to make this point in addition to those that we've brought up to this juncture. The Chinese investment, yes, with subsidies massively from our state of Michigan and in the case of some of these facilities in Florida and elsewhere, their investment in the kinds of companies like GNC are precisely the sorts of things that President Trump has said must not persist in his America First investment policy. If you're interested in learning more about that policy, I'm afraid that all I can point you to is the statement, the memorandum that unveiled it on the White House website. Because as far as I can tell, with the exception of a brief interview that Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had with Maria Bartiromo a couple of weeks ago, there's been no public mention made of this initiative at all by the White House, which is perhaps a subject of questions or conversation as well. But it is nonetheless the official position of the President of the United States that we're going to wean ourselves off of inbound Chinese investing in this country, especially in the kinds of sectors that I mentioned earlier, as well as outbound investing, like, among other things, investing in cattle, this second of the two Chinese battery makers that the state of Michigan has been trying to seduce or otherwise subsidize into building electric battery plant manufacturing capability in the state of Michigan. And just a final word on that, there is a concerted effort underway as we speak by Jamie Dimon's JP Morgan, by Brian Moynihan's Bank of America, by Ted Pick's Morgan Stanley, and by David Solomon's Goldman Sachs to pour still more outbound American investment into the coffers of the Chinese Communist Party, with a secondary IPO coming out of Hong Kong for this company, Cattle. It has been identified by the Defense Department as a Chinese military company operating in the United States. It has been identified by Congressman Molinar, Congressman Mark Green of the Homeland Security Committee, then Senator Marco Rubio, now Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as a slave labor exploiting company as well. So as we're following the money, folks, we need to understand that this is your money that would be winding up in the hands of a military company in China, that is to say, helping improve the threat we face from that quarter, and put us in a position whereby, I'm afraid, not only will we be greatly further enabling this foreign adversary, as the president calls China, but also quite possibly setting the stage for vast further losses of pension funds, mutual funds, exchange-traded funds, 401k plans, college savings, and so on, of perhaps thousands and thousands, if not actually millions of Americans. So with that, as you know, the sort of body of examples, very current examples of what is going on here, let us open this up to a round of questions, which we'll move through smartly with the cooperation of our team. Ron Armstrong, you have been, I think, very alive to this danger from China and instrumental in helping the folks in Michigan, among other places, reckon with it. talk a little bit further, if you would, about what the governor of Michigan, and I think it was the state legislature as well, if I'm not mistaken, as well as some of the other levels of government, were saying about this and the lack of transparency that characterized what they were up to.
Well, I think there's a couple of things, Frank. One, I wanted to give some very current information I wanted to share with you that I just had received while we were in this webinar, and that is in Montana, Illinois. That's the other Goshen, Illinois project. Voters rejected the mayor candidate over support for the CCC Goshen just this past Tuesday. The headline says villagers take a page from Acosta County, Michigan residents to thwart Chinese battery company plans. Just to give you an idea of the numbers, a candidate, Annette Lamore, who is anti-Goshen, won 56% of the vote, defeating the pro-Goshen candidate, Joel Geske. And interesting here, he not only was the village finance committee member there in Kankakee County, Illinois, but he had been a trustee in that county and in that township for 20 years. And he was defeated 56-44 this past Tuesday, telling you and showing you that the people of America are for pro-American manufacturing. They are not pro-Chinese, regardless of what you're hearing from people like Governor Whitmer or the governor out of Illinois or many of these blue state governors. Our governor basically packaged federal funds along with what they're calling Michigan Economic Development. They slid them over into another department, actually, that gave almost unilateral decision-making to appointed people by the governor, not elected people, by appointed people, to grant and subsidize the big three large union corporations. And by the way, this was going to be one, because the idea was we'll get you these subsidies, but when the unions come calling, you will not turn them back. And that is exactly why they were pushing the way they were. Now understand, that's the top of these companies, a Ford Motor Company, which is Kettle and or Goshen High Tech. It isn't the people, it isn't the UAW workers and the people that have fought, I think, so hard. And that's, of course, what the Democrats used to say they were doing all of this for. And so this was never about jobs. This was about control. It was about moving the auto industry and forcing them into an area that the consumers are simply not interested in, can't afford, are not going to be able to move forward without federal and state government subsidies. And thank goodness our president now has removed those subsidies, if you will. And so therefore, states sometimes are propping up in the short term, but they're still losing money on every vehicle. The infrastructure isn't in place. And the simple fact is, what is it? 10, 12% of the people in America are interested in electric cars. If I needed a third or fourth car driving real close by or lived in a city, I think an electric car is a fine where they're purchase. But really where we are today is about control. It is about affecting, I believe, Frank, our ability to for mobility. I think they were looking at being able to shut off our cars. In Michigan, I'll tell you another thing that followed this, because we have one of the largest gasoline taxes in America. The Michigan does. I think it was 75 cents a gallon or something like that. And basically, what happens to the electric vehicle? Well, we don't get any of that. So two things happen. We increase our electric rates for everyone, number one, because we can't afford infrastructure. And then the second thing she did was decided we're going to start charging tolls on the roads based on the mileage you drive, which means they were going to begin tracking the movement of every single person in the state of Michigan. And they were running through that through a potential executive order, as well as the Democratic-controlled legislature. Fortunately, we took back the House, and they are pushing back against all of these things. But basically, our roads are a mess. Our bridges are a disaster. The electric vehicles certainly haven't helped. And their goal was, again, to control and have access to all of the movement of the people of Michigan. It is the 10-minute city. It's all the things, 30-minute city, whatever you want to call it. That was the ultimate goal of these people on the left. It is a globalist control mechanism, and it has nothing to do with saving our environment or our climate, Frank.
Wow. Thank you, Ron, very much. Armand, I want to be corrected if I've got this wrong, but I think it's right. I can't remember whether it was you who told me this story or Ron or one of your other activists up in Green Township, but there was a certain thuggishness that went on in the course of the fight that you've waged. You mentioned people were afraid, and not unreasonably. I was told that at a time when either locals or who were working for Goshen or Goshen personnel were going to landowners in the area and telling them basically, you better sell your land to us now. We're willing to give you a good price for it, but we're going to begin emitting lithium dust from this factory that will pollute the land and greatly degrade its value, particularly for farming purposes, and presumably the water and the like as well. And, you know, obviously it was a shakedown, and I am delighted that in the end it hasn't worked. But is that a correct rendering of the kind of thing that people up there were subjected to? And what does that tell us about, well, the kind of operations that we're dealing with here? People who would be willing to pollute our land deliberately are certainly not to be trusted with, you know, operating in our communities, are they?
The essence of the story is correct. One of the points is a little off. When Goshen sent its real estate agents around, which had no connection on paper to Goshen, but when they sent them around the community to buy up the original property, they would come and give them the sales speech and say, you have so many hours to make a decision. They gave them amounts of money that may have been double or triple what their property was worth. But you know, you have to figure this out in the next 4 hours or 6 hours, whatever, or by tomorrow. And if you don't sign, then we're not going to give you this kind of money again. And this giant 1 million, 2 million, 2.5 million square foot factory is going in your neighborhood, and you're going to be stuck. So that was a thuggishness that you have to. You've got to sell right now, and you have to sign a non-disclosure agreement. And there was a big shakedown, yes, and that was gone. They really wanted to buy up more than a square mile of property. They were held eventually to 270 acres, but they really wanted well over a square mile of property. So yes, that's true. I do want to mention one thing, kind of good news. Ron touched on this. The city of Manteno, Ohio, had an election this past Tuesday. 4 of the 5 candidates for city council, so it was a city council of 5 members, 4 of the 5 victorious city council members were people from the community that did not support Goshen in their community. So yes, the mayor or the chair of the city council won, Annette Lamore, but also so didn't 3 other people. So when people start paying attention, people still love this country. There may be a few pockets within our government that don't care about it, and a few business people that don't care about it, but the people still love America, still love our freedom. We don't want you telling us what to do or where to go to church or what kind of mask to wear or not wear. But you get the people involved, which takes some effort and some skill, and good things can happen.
Yeah. Well, you know, this was the genius of the founders, I think, was their recognition that the closer government is to the people, the more freedom is going to be preserved. I'm going to have to look into this issue of the lithium dust because I think that is a piece of the story, at least that I heard previously. And the rest of the thuggishness was bad enough, but there's that too, because this is, as I understand it, really pristine country, as well as very pure water. And it's just an outrage that it was fairly nearly compromised in this way. Dave Walsh, again, just to come back to this basic proposition, Donald Trump has said, in fact, he issued an executive order in his first term that we are not going to rely on foreign equipment in our electric grid. Specifically, I think he was talking about transformers. At the time, I think we had 200 Chinese transformers in the grid. And his purpose was to obviously winnow that down. Mention has been made that, we don't manufacture these things here, hardly at all, and have to import it. But mostly, we would prefer to see it imported from places like Germany, I think, and South Korea rather than from China. But I'm told now that it's over 400 of these transformers, thanks to Joe Biden on day one eviscerating that executive order and opening the floodgates to these Chinese transformers. Is that correct? And is it also correct, Dave, that at least 2 of these have been disassembled, I think out at Sandia Laboratory, if I'm not mistaken, and discovered, shockingly, to have back doors that would enable them to be, command destructed or turned off or otherwise impacted with ripple effects throughout the grid?
Yeah, the 200 plus high power, high voltage transformers that are only basically imported into this country. We don't have manufacturing capacity in any quantity for high voltage, high power transformers. Yeah, 200 more did come from China. And yes, at Sandia Labs about 6 years ago, some reverse engineering was done to determine several of those on a test basis only, not all of them, just a couple of them did have sensors. Mm-hmm. So this is entirely true. But no, his executive order back then and his policies now aren't about kiboshing foreign investment here. They're actually about welcoming it, but not the foreign investment in the bulk electricity grid of hostile nations. That's what that executive order was geared at, investment here and the import of equipment from hostile nations such as China. And this is an old designation of the Defense Department back years and years ago, stratifying the countries in the world that had the most political animus with the U.S. China always has been at the top of the heap, as rated by the DoD, for tight surveillance on any facilities that manufacture DoD type equipment. Trump simply expanded that to energy equipment, which was totally prudent, that they're also a hostile nation when it comes to wanting to destabilize the country industrially and electrically in capacity. So properly characterizing them consistently with the DoD criteria from years ago that they are a hostile nation. And that's what the KIBO, not against Japan, our friendliest of allies. We had, Frank, in our time, we had Suzuki, Honda come here, Toyota, a lot of concern. Well, over time, people discovered the costs were better and the reliability was better. And the Japanese companies have created 800,000 jobs here. They remain a steadfast ally. So this isn't what we're talking about. We're talking about the foreign investment in the bulk electricity grid by a hostile nation to us, China at the top of the heap. So his pressure on this is completely appropriate, totally appropriate.
Well, and urgently needed, needless to say. Finally, if you're still with us, Tom, and up to it, I'd like to just ask you a quick question about the outbound investing side of the equation at the state level. I understand that State Shield and I think a couple of other outfits that focus on trying to help advance state legislation that makes sense at the national security level, not least, something that state legislators may not think is really their job, as they say. But some progress has been made with state treasurers, for example, in terms of impressing upon them that their pension funds, the funds they manage for teachers or other government employees, what have you, are in serious jeopardy if they have invested them in these Chinese companies, particularly some that are on blacklists, like cattle. It's not been fully sanctioned as it should be at the moment, and we hope that this will be something President Trump will fix as part of the implementation of this new America First investment policy. Is the idea that if the Pentagon says this is a Chinese military company operating in the United States, it should be sanctioned under the entities list at the Commerce Department or the OFAC list at the Treasury Department, or both, better yet, to really shut it down, not allow it to have the funding that it profits from at our expense, and potentially at the expense of our national security. And in fact, if I may just make one further point on that, Cattle, the company that we've been discussing here, is evidently in the process of upgrading the batteries that have been part of the power system of conventional submarines, of which the Chinese have a lot. The old lead acid batteries are being replaced with modern high-tech lithium ion batteries by Cattle. And according to Captain James Fennell, who has appeared on these programs faithfully for many, many years, the effect of doing that will be to both extend the range and the time they can stay basically silently operating underwater quite dramatically. He said that it would be the effect of adding 45 submarines to the threat that our battle groups and other naval assets and the like have to contend with in the Western Pacific these days. This is a very material threat to the men and women in the United States Navy and should be understood as such. And I say right here personally that those four gentlemen that I mentioned, Jamie Dimon, Brian Moynihan, Ted Pick, and David Solomon, will have blood on their hands if they raise this $7 billion and possibly more for this company, Cattle, a Chinese military company operating in the United States. So to you, could you just say a word about this, Tom? Are we seeing progress on the other side of this ledger, the outbound investment side?
We are, Frank, and we are. So Indiana was a leader in this. The federal, I can't remember the actual name of it. It's like the one of the main federal retirement agencies.
Thrift Savings Plan.
Right, a while back. And in Missouri, the treasurer in Missouri has been a great leader on this. We actually have legislation going in a number of states that we are advocating for to really make sure that we're divesting from China. This should not be, as you noted, a partisan issue. We're talking about divesting your teacher's retirement fund. Your teachers should not be putting their retirement dollars in companies that either are using Uyghur slave labor or are promoting Chinese military aggression. And so we've been successful. What I will say, and I don't mind calling them out here in this forum, we have not heard any pushback until recently. And one of the major companies giving us pushback now is BlackRock. And BlackRock, as Chairman Molinar noted about a year ago, I believe, in one of his reports, apparently had invested about $1.9 billion in China. So I am hopeful that between what President Trump is doing and the efforts we're making at the state level, that we will stop some of the outbound investment, because not only is it counter to our values as a democratic free society, but it's really, I think, probably a really crappy investment to put your money in a country that is so authoritarian, is so demanding of the way that things are done, in which Xi himself is able to get a golden share in certain companies that even if the Chinese government owns 1%, they end up controlling the company. This is not a transparent economy. It is not an economy that has the rule of law. It is an economy that is based around Chinese aggression and ensuring that the Chinese government is the beneficiary of everything that goes on and not the stockholder, which is, of course, what we're used to in the West.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I hope that this is a coming thing for those folks, because in addition to the points you've just made so well, Tom, of course, if the Chinese Communist Party goes to war with the United States, every dime that investors have put into China will be gone. I think that's just, the facts of life. So for those reasons, among many, many others, I pray that coming out of this particularly powerful webinar program, we will have further interest in and support for President Trump's America First investment policy. Not, as Wall Street and some of these blue state governors and others have made so clear, is their purpose, which is a China First investment policy. With that, we're going to thank all of these wonderful participants. I want to again salute the absent Congressman Molinar. We look forward to talking with him next week and thank him profoundly for his leadership in Congress and in Michigan on the issues we've been discussing here. It's tremendously appreciated, as is the great work of Ron Armstrong and Ormond Hook and, of course, Dave Walsh and Tom Rawlings and Joe Gebbia at State Shield. Our sincere thanks, especially for taking some time to talk about your work and the lessons that we can learn as a nation from the Minutemen, the modern day Minutemen, almost exactly 250 years after Concord and Lexington. God bless you all. Thank you for listening. Please help us get the word around to our countrymen about what's at stake here and why we must take down the Chinese Communist Party. Didi, back to you.
Thanks, Frank. And thanks to all of you for being here today. We also thank the Epoch Times for live streaming this webinar. A video of this webinar will be posted to presentdangerchina.org within a day of the conclusion of our program. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. And subscribe to our Substack at Present Danger China. Follow us on X at CPD China. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how the CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.